Sorry. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Are you opposed, Tony? Are you okay?
That was an aye. Good morning.
Perfect. Public comments. Do we have any? No public comments. We're moving on to grad pathway policy guidance.
Before we, good morning, board members. Before we kick things off, I wanted to say a bit of a thank you. As you know, under Alicia's leadership, this has been a 5-month process that has taken state board staff across the state to meet with many people. First, school focus groups, teachers, counselors, principals, superintendents, districts, special education experts, Association and the Alliance for the Excellent Education and Knowledge Works. The staffs also met with state government agencies, including the Governor's Office, Department of Education, Workforce Development, Commission on Higher Ed, Institute of Higher Ed, Chamber of Commerce, the Indianapolis Mayor's Office, and the Indiana Manufacturers Association. Now, these meetings have resulted in good discussions, great questions, and what I truly believe to be a phenomenal guidance document. I want to thank Alicia for her leadership in this, for all her efforts, and I want to thank more than anything all those groups that took the time to engage in discussion, ask these important questions, and provide comments on so many drafts. I can't even count. Most importantly, it's important to realize that this is a very important document. This is going to be the document that's going to be used for implementation for pathways and will guide this effort for the future. So again, thank you to all those folks that spent the time to meet with us, to ask those questions, and thank you to Alicia for her leadership in this.
And if I could, Chair.
Dr. Bertram?
Just, Matt, first of all, and again, actually, great, really a wonderful document, and just very detailed. It's long, but it seems to me that it's going to take that kind of detail to answer many of the questions that people have been asking, and it seems just very thorough and well done. So I think it's going to provide a lot of guidance and support for schools as they implement pathways. So again, thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Well done.
Morning.
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 So, this is going to be fun. This is version 6, so there have been a lot of drafts. So the field has seen at least 3 versions of this. So I want to thank everyone as well who has provided comments and edits and feedback. It's been very helpful. Matt kind of already went through this, so I'm going to just keep us going. So just to break down the guidance document altogether, and if I am repetitive or if this isn't necessary, just feel free to stop me or stop with any questions. So the table of contents breaks down thusly, and we were treating this very similar to the way the feds do regulations. So we wanted to make sure it was comprehensive and robust, but also user-friendly. So the table of contents in the document is linked by section and question, so that if someone wants to go to a specific section or a specific question, they can just click on it in the table of contents and it will take them there immediately in the document. There's also a glossary of terms at the back, just to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language. That started to be problematic throughout the process with various acronyms, so I got feedback that that would be helpful just to keep everyone in the same realm. And then again, to Dr. Bertram's point, there was a breadth and a depth of questions. So I relied heavily on the focus groups and the other agencies to drill down into what was really needed. So all the questions in there have been asked by a practitioner or have requested more additional information or examples or something. So this is in response to what I was hearing. So also the document aims to strike a precarious balance, allowing as much flexibility for schools and districts as possible, but also providing guardrails to ensure that every student has a quality experience. And these two polar opposites really reflect the disparity that's across the field from what people were looking for in this document. So some of the focus groups, and even some of the individuals who I would talk with, said total flexibility, total autonomy, we want this short and sweet, and then some people would say, this does not answer anything, I need to know more specifics, I want this spelled out very clearly. So those are the those are the two groups I would hear from. So I was trying to get to a place where it was almost a happy medium, that there was enough flexibility, that there's a lot of local decision making, there's a lot of onus put on schools and districts to determine what would be best for their schools and their students based on their context. But there are those design principles and examples in place to also help give information and to set up some parameters. So the document breaks down thusly. So the executive summary. So the purpose of the document is just to go over statute very quickly. This is very standard in these kinds of documents. The executive summary is 5 pages. It's a top-level synopsis for those who aren't like me and don't love 55-page documents. And so it gives a summary of the key points, and then from there, folks can use the table of contents to drill down into deeper issues or to go to specific questions or areas based on the executive summary. The high school diploma piece covers a variety of topics, from the new diploma designations that came out of session to laws governing special education and EL students to waivers. And then, so the crux, I would say, is probably section C with those subsections, the employability skills, and then the breakdown of the project, service, and work-based learning pieces. So I started with having each one have its own separate section, but I found there was a lot of duplicative questions that were being repeated in each section. So feedback I got from the field was to combine employability skills and address some of the more common themes across the 3 in one section, and then get into the specifics at a different point in the document. So that's why there's that general employability skills, which has a variety of information across all of the sections. So from the time commitment, that's a big piece. The guidance document does not set forth required hours or seat time to fulfill this section, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. Instead, there are 3 suggested options that schools could use. One is using the gauge of a credit or a semester or trimester or a quarter, or that kind of gauge to see that kind of fulfillment. DOE has a recommendation of 75 to 100 hours for work-based learning. And then another option would be a competency-based model, which is focused on mastery and not on seat time. The second big piece that applies to across the 3 is the student work product. There are several options listed, but per the policy document passed in December, there has to be a student work product made or produced or created by the student. And there also has to be school validation, which could be in the form of a rubric or awarding a credit, or again, that's really up to local decision making. So that puts it back in the hands of the schools and districts. How do they want to validate that this is quality and that it meets all the parameters set forth in the document? And the last big section I'll just highlight on is the student's IEP, which must include appropriate accommodations and related services and supplementary aids to help the student meet all pathway requirements, including the employability skills experiences. There must be equal access for students. So students cannot be counseled toward one experience over the other based on their disability. They have to have access to everything, and you have the appropriate accommodations as determined by their case conference committee. And I'm really thankful I was able to use the department's special ed team led by Pam Wright to help craft those sections. So I was able to get some great expertise to ensure that we're following all federal laws. So then just kind of skimming through. So project-based learning, I used the Buck Institute's gold standard, which is pretty widely recognized as a leading practice for project-based learning design principles. As you've seen in the document, there's a explanation section. There's a lot of explanation around what projects versus project-based learning is. That was a big topic I felt needed to be addressed from the questions I was getting from practitioners, was use of projects as a way to do project-based learning, but that does not actually mean project-based learning. So probably during implementation, there'll need to be additional PD for successful implementation of project-based learning. And then service-based learning, this was a little bit of a trickier section because it's very broad. I used the National Youth Leadership Council's principles, which is used pretty much by every state that has a service-based learning component in their grad requirements or high school requirements generally, if you go through some regs that they have put out in guidance, those are the principles that they reference. And additionally, I tried to give some good examples because that was another big piece of feedback I got was because this is very broad, because it encompasses a lot, people wanted very specific concrete examples that they could reference. And then also, and you'll see that reflected in the document, and then also the difference between service learning and service-based learning is also spelled out because again, that's a continuum that caused a lot of confusion. So then keep going to work-based learning. So the NGA principles were developed by DWD, DOE, and CHE. Since they already existed, I felt like it made sense for us to use them, and they were already being used in DOE's work-based learning materials. So this section, like the others, has a very similar setup, has examples, it has courses that could satisfy this, and it also discusses some of the more nuanced issues around employment outside of school and that sort of thing. But one key thing I found with work-based learning is going to be dispelling a lot of myths around it that's going to cause a hindrance. For example, apprenticeships that can only be for students who are 18 and older. That is not true according to the feds. It can be 16 years or older, but their insurance companies can cause some issues. So we've been working with the IMA and with USDOL to help address that and help to get some information out to employers so that they understand a little bit more around what they can and cannot do according to federal law. In the next section, this is the easiest one for me to write because it was pretty straightforward, but it was just going through some of the more technical questions around this, like super scores, what does a C average really mean? Can I mix and match dual credit and AP? But they were just questions that kept coming up throughout the 5 months of meetings that someone was like, oh, I heard this from so-and-so, this needs to be addressed. I have this question, like, is this right? So that's why that section actually turned out to be the longest, but overall pretty much the easiest. The LCP section, you've seen all that information before during the passage of the last two frameworks. Logistical information, I was able to work with the department on that. Main piece there is the grad rate and then the glossary. So any questions at this point? I was trying to go as fast as I could so we can get to the farmer's market.
Any questions from the board? Mary Ann, did you have a question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was probably, I would say at this point, the main problem I'm hearing from people is just going to be tracking, which is, I mean, we can't do anything about that through policy necessarily, but the way that there are some mechanisms that people can use to track specifically that work product, and that could be through an e-portfolio, it could be through Naviance, Career Explorer. There's some websites that house things. I'm also working with CHE to see if we can update the transcript through Parchment to see if we can at least have that recorded, maybe not kept, maybe not the record kept, but at least the completion of that experience recorded on the transcript so that can follow students a little more easier. But the retaining of that information is a trickier piece just because it depends on the scope of the project and the scope of the work. So I don't have an easy answer. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So and that again developed over the course of the drafts. I started off with a pretty more conservative. Like every student had to have this kind of portfolio, and the feedback was, given that there's a very wide range of projects or service or work learning experience that could happen, we should make this applicable to any kind of experience that student may have. So it is wide. It puts a lot of that decision making on the schools and students. So these were the three areas for clarification that I wanted to get from you all today that are just questions above my pay grade that I wanted to get some additional clarification on that has been coming up throughout the 5 months we've been doing this. So the first one is the ASVAB. There have been a lot of variety of questions around this test, particularly the scores. In the document, I list the scores needed for each branch, which follows the policy document in terms of students needing a qualifying score for a military branch in order to use that as their grad pathway. However, there's been feedback that we should just have the score listed as 31 since that is the minimum, that is minimum score that is needed to enlist and kind of take away some of that confusion around tying the scores to the military branches. So the discrepancy, I think, is based on how the board views this test. Is this a test that's meant for those who are just enlisting? Is this another way to address proficiency? And then depending on that, I will amend the guidance to advise students that this is more tied to enlistment purposes for students who want to use this for their post-secondary ready competency, or this can be used more writ large. So I just wanted to pose the question and see what the feeling of you all are.
What do we see as the purpose for the other exams?
So the other exams, the purpose of all the post-secondary ready competencies is to have some sort of transferable currency from high school that will translate to post-secondary. So if it's an SAT score, that will designate remediation-free college entrance and enrollment. If it's an industry-recognized credential, that will translate to a job in that industry.
And based on whose determination? That from college universities saying that these are the scores we need to increase the likelihood that students will not need remediation.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
So wouldn't it reason then we would ask the same question of the armed forces? What are your expectations for students to have the skills and knowledge? And I assume that they've established scores to reflect that.
Mm-hmm.
So based on that information, would it make sense then that would be the score that we would require the ASVAB for students pursuing a career in the military?
So my question though is, so the minimum score that a student needs to enlist in the Army or the Marines is a 31, but the
Yes.
different branches have different scores. So
Which
Air
is
Force
the
is
same,
35.
same with Rose-Hulman and IB Tech,
Right.
right? Or you just fill in the blank, they all have different requirements, but we've established one score based on what higher education have said to us is necessary, they believe. So if you can get into the Army or the Marines with a 31, why would we suggest the score would be different than that? Question, I guess.
And I honestly think during the pathway meetings, when we were establishing the framework that we approved, I think we led the field to believe a 31 would get you into any of them. So I think the field is under the assumption that we're taking the 31, regardless of what path they choose to take. So in all fairness to how it was presented up front, it was 31.
Dr. Bertram, would you repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, I was just curious when you look at how we've established an SAT or an ACT benchmark. It's based on what higher education is saying to us is necessary. They believe will increase the likelihood of non-remediation success in college university. But they're all going to have different entrance requirements. That's just a baseline. So if you look at, we take any of our college universities from Notre Dame and Rose-Hulman to any others, they're going to have different expectations, and many are going to be above that benchmark. So I was just then using that same rationale and applying it to ASVAB. What are they saying to us from a military perspective? But we do have a range from 31 to 45 in terms of what they expect. From a student pursuing a career in the military, why would we have a benchmark higher than? That was my question. Would it make sense in that a logical explanation of the minimum score?
Kind of like what we were talking about prior to the meeting. Setting those standards.
Alicia, I support the 31 for all military. However, I think it's really important in the document and any other communication that we clearly communicate to students that certain branches have higher expectations. Also, a student that's on a pathway to a military group does not feel that the 31 is going to meet all of the military requirement. So I'm okay with it if that's your intent, to ensure that we communicate the other higher requirements based on the branch. Is that your
I mean,
intent?
I don't have a preference one way or the other. That's why I didn't make the call in the document, and wanted to pose the question. If you think it is better to have all of the scores listed, or is it better just to say minimum 31?
I guess I'm looking for a middle ground here to say that for our use, it would be 31. However, maybe in parentheses or in an asterisk, that we clarify down below that some branches may require a higher score for entrance or admittance, or I guess it's called enlistment into that particular branch.
I know you've answered this question 2 or 3 times. One more time for me. From higher ed, who established those numbers and why did we land?
The College Board and the
College Board and
ACT.
will those, understanding was from previous conversations, those could change or be modified?
They're based on national trend data across the nation and across students who are enrolling. I checked with both organizations just to get a timeline. Neither think they're going to be doing it in the near future. So not in the next 2 to 3 years, but they couldn't say how long it was going to be. So that's why there is a question in the document that addresses, so if a student gets that benchmark in their sophomore year, but let's say it changes in their junior year, that student's grandfathered in under the score that was set during their sophomore year. So they don't have to retake it and then get a higher score. They're going to be grandfathered under whatever the policy was at the time.
I'm going to always ask, where to say in writing, would it make sense for us to put that in writing somewhere in the document?
It is.
It's in there? Thank
It's, I think, D, maybe 9.
you.
D9,
Okay.
around
Thank you.
there. Yeah,
Good, thanks.
that's the SAT section.
Good, thanks.
Okay, so that clears up the ASVAB for me. I can make that adjustment in the document, clarifying the minimum score is 31, but for additional, if a student is interested in enlisting in additional branches beyond the Army and the Marines, they would need a higher score. So the second big area, I would say, pushback that I've gotten so far is the preparing for college and the career paragraph. So this is on page 42. It's one paragraph within the whole document, but there was some consternation that I got some phone calls over. So it's the paragraph that starts with preparing for college and the careers and personal financial responsibility or foundational CTE courses, blah, blah, blah. So the issue is what counts towards concentrator. Does personal financial responsibility and adult roles and responsibilities count towards a concentrator? Having worked with Amanda and her team, we've determined that it's only those courses that are within the approved CTE course sequence. So personal finance is for most CTE concentrators, except for business and maybe 1 or 2 facts, it's an elective. So it does not count. According to our current state-approved course sequences, it does not count towards a concentrator status. And that has caused a lot of confusion because a lot of practitioners were under the impression that personal finance did count towards concentrator status. But the issue specifically around this paragraph is that one school of thought is we should not be advertising that preparing for colleges and careers should be counting towards concentrator status. We should be focusing students on those higher level CTE courses. And then the other school of thought is that this should be advertised because this is a foundational course that all students can take and it counts towards their 6 credits. Again, because I was getting pushback from 2 different groups, I didn't want to make that call on my own. So I crafted the paragraph, I think, in a way to get to both pieces, but this was something I wanted to run by all of you before you have to take a vote and you get questions about it in July. So just wanted to see what your thoughts are, if this should be included, if this should be modified, and what direction you'd like to give. Or it's great.
Any comments? Dr. Yeager? Oh, sorry.
Yes, preparing for colleges, and it's the one under CT concentrator. I'm a former teacher, so I'll wait.
You have comment? No?
Okay, so,
I have a
yep.
question. So if we define pathways as a sequence of courses that are integrated in some way, right? That's how we've defined it.
Yeah.
Then individual courses in isolation really are not a pathway,
No.
right? And so if we use that logic, which seems to be the logic we've used from the beginning on the pathway committee, then this paragraph does do it.
Okay.
It answers that question. The personal finance class should be embedded into a pathway that is a sequence of courses that build upon each other and are integrated.
So it already is. It's in those business pathways.
Right. However, they would not necessarily count in every pathway.
That's right.
Because it's an individual course.
Yep.
So that's what you're saying in that paragraph,
Yep.
as I read it. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
The whole issue doesn't make sense to me, really, because we have two pathways we allow preparing for college and career to count. Don't we want all of our students to prepare for college and careers?
And so that course counts for every CT course sequence.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear on that. So, but that's part of the concentrator.
Yes.
So every CT,
Yes.
every one.
Yes. There may be some newer ones it's not a part of, but the vast majority. There may be a new like computer science one that I'm thinking of that it may not be there, but 90%, yes. Preparing for colleges and careers is 1 credit towards the 6. It's personal finance. It does not count towards the 6
Got
credits.
it. Okay, clarification. Thank you. Got it.
And the same is true for adult roles and responsibilities. Sometimes those courses are interchanged. So it has to be according to the course sequences that are on DOE's website currently. All right, so I'll leave that in for now. If anything changes or if you hear from someone, you can let me know. So the last big issue that I think I've been wrestling with through all these meetings are the prescribing hours for box 2. So depending on who I'm talking to that day, I'll get one opinion or the other. So one day it'll be, oh, I love how it is. There's so much flexibility. I don't have to have seat time. The student can determine. And then I talk to someone else and they go, whoa, how many hours do I have to do for this? I don't know. I don't know what to tell students. I don't know what to tell parents. I want to know the exact number of hours that's the minimum. So I already went over what's in the document. I give those 3 options around some options that schools could use to determine the hours for those based learning opportunities. But again, because this is an issue that keeps getting brought up in these focus meetings, I wanted to bring this to your attention as well. See if you had a feeling one way or the other.
This is the dilemma between flexibility and specificity. So we have, since the beginning, flexibility has been the mantra of the committee, and as it's gone through the process, flexibility is still the mantra. But on the other hand, we want people who want guardrails and specificity and specific numbers of hours. And it's really difficult to do without infringing upon the purpose of what we're trying to do with the other term. So I don't think we can do both in this case. I would suggest maybe we need to insert somewhere that the experience needs to be rigorous.
Okay.
To use a term such as rigorous so that as these are reviewed, our review committee using the assessment rubric can make a determination of what rigorous is. We do this all the time, right, in assessment, because if everything was spelled out in hours, we really wouldn't need anyone to review these. It would just be a matter of meeting specific hours. But I think some experiences, in order to be rigorous, might need to be more hours than others. So in a policy document, I don't think we should define it. I would rather use a term that would indicate quality such as rigorous. And there may be some other terms we could use, but that would be my recommendation in order to meet both specificity and flexibility.
Okay, I can include that.
The definition of rigorous. Is that the flexibility that you're?
Right. I don't think we should put a definition. If we put a definition to rigorous in the number of hours, we've sort of violated our understanding that it needs to be flexibility. But we do have a review process. And in that review process, as they review a number of documents, I think we'll get some insight into that. But again, I think each field experience is different. And because of that, you cannot set a specific number of hours in general for all experiences.
Just so I'm clear, so the review process, though, isn't going to happen at our level. It's going to happen at the school level.
Correct.
Okay, okay.
Correct.
I just wasn't sure if you meant we're all going to be reviewing projects.
No.
for
I
kids.
trust people at the local level to determine what's rigorous. They do that every day.
Great, yep.
Right? And so this is another indication of trusting administrators, teachers, others at the local level to determine what is rigorous. I don't think we should do it at a state policy
Okay.
level.
I just wanted to make sure.
That was my question. I wanted to make sure that we were talking about who was reviewing, because the state's going to review the local creative pathways. They're not reviewing box 2. And so I was just wanting to clarify who was doing the review. That was.
Good clarification.
Can I ask about with box 2 with extracurricular and co-curricular on page 31? Help me out with B10.
I'm sorry?
B10.
B10, so that would be
The extracurricular, co-curricular?
So B10 was specifically around the one academic year.
Yeah, so help me with that.
So that's a great question. And that was something, again, I relied very much on practitioners to help me clarify, because some sports, some extracurriculars are a season long or a semester long. People in the field were worried, do I now have to sign a student up for 3 sports, so it's a full year? So the intention, I believe, that the panel had with that was to have a student meaningfully engaged in an extracurricular sport from beginning to completion. And that's how we use that in the document, is to clarify that the student must be meaningfully engaged from the beginning. So if that's pre-training in the summer through a sports team going to state, or the rehearsals through the execution of the play, or the completion of the newspaper or the yearbook, whatever it may be, the student they cannot just sign up the first day and say, check. They have to be meaningfully engaged from the beginning of the activity through the completion.
You made a statement, I want to be clear. You said if it starts in the summer. So if you have a basketball program and you have open gym in the summer, you're saying that we would expect the student to participate in all of that all summer long.
No, I think that would be determined at the local level. I was just using that as an example, but that would be determined at the
But it's
local
an important
level.
example because there are programs that will expect that. But you're talking about the season.
Yes, yes,
So it will be start basketball in November, and they have to be there at the beginning, at the end. They have to
Correct.
successfully complete the season,
correct, yes.
and that would satisfy the.
As the guidance document has it. If that's an area where you all are uncomfortable, I can change that.
I have a question on that. So we're using the criterion of time only. But in the case of athletics, is it possible that a coach would say, yes, this person put in the time, but it was not meaningful to the team or to that student? Do we want to get to that level? Did you get any input on that? Because I'm a little uncomfortable with people just breathing and showing up. I think it's much more than that. And have you thought about someone signing off, such as a coach, if it's a sporting team?
Yeah, so 2 answers to that. So the first is, again, the school has to validate it somehow. So that trust, without specifying how they validate it, that trust is being put with schools and professionals to ensure that they are ensuring that this was a quality experience for the student. And then the second answer is, the guidance document does talk about meaningful service at B4, which is then reiterated down in B7 around meaningful engagement. So meaningful service, looking at National Youth Leadership Council, but also at the U.S. Community Service Organization, that's like AmeriCorps, and administers those programs. They define it as not just participation, but participation, involvement, execution, implementation, and reflection. So those are all pieces that qualify as something as meaningful service. So translating that, I'm not a sports person, so I can't do that for you, but translating that to an extracurricular or sport would be meaningful engagement. So it isn't just a student showing up, they have to be again, I don't know what actively involved means. I would leave that to the coach or the school. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think the effort piece is really important, or some way to get at a criterion beyond just time.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in the document, it needs to get at that it's just not so many weeks or completing a season. And there's got to be some qualitative component. So if we think of quantitative being the time, the qualitative component, I'd like to see someone affirms that, whether it be a coach or if it's a club at a school, the sponsor, the faculty sponsor of that club would sign off on something, but some indication. And I don't want to get into the local levels business, but I think it's important for us to say in the policy documents, it has to be quantitative and qualitative assessment of that student's experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can include that. Yeah.
I'm assuming this would work for a person who does stats for that activity all season long, student as the manager for that team.
Like a student trainer.
Manager.
Okay, yeah. Again, so.
Oh, that's another one. Student trainers are a
Right.
big deal right now.
So the document doesn't specify at that level. Again, that would be a decision, that would be up to the school.
Locally decided. Okay, thank you.
So again, it doesn't specify it has to be the president of a club, or that's determined by the school as to what meaningful engagement.
The purpose is to have students engaged in school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something else. So try to compare experiences. We can compare and should be able to compare knowledge. I believe it's going to be absolutely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment calls whether getting on the school's basketball team, same. Teaming club. Go on the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
That just has to be a local decision. Look at that. Does this qualify? Does this meet the expectation? Are students engaged?
Yep. And so the through line for all three of the activity, or all three of the experiences, is that student product. So if that, again, from that option, that menu of options, which I stole from the Department of Education material, but so that menu of options, what does the student do to demonstrate those employability skills, and what is the product that comes out of it? If it's a resume, if it's a cover letter, if it's a portfolio, if it's recently a student got a book published. Like, what is that? What is the demonstration that student did for employability skills? Again, I don't want to mandate that, so that's why there's a number of options, which again causes consternation, but also excitement. So that's where we are.
To clarify, we're not asking schools to compare one experience with another at all.
Mm-mm.
What we're saying is within that isolated experience, has that student accomplished the quantitative and qualitative criteria of the school sponsor, school faculty member, school coach, whoever's responsible for it?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had the question regarding, for example, Snyder hockey or Northrop rugby? Where are we with that?
So the guidance document does not address that. That would be a decision.
Those are most likely lay coaches, cross teams popping up. That was a question. Is Is that most likely a local decision?
Yes. I mean, I can address that specifically in the guidance document if you want me to, but at this point, there are no parameters around that issue.
There are all kinds of clubs. All the schools have different clubs, different levels.
So would you prefer that I include something around school-based activity? It has to be school-sponsored or school-based? No? Oh, okay.
I would prefer that it addresses it and allows them to, again,
Okay.
and specifically says they're given the option to determine if they want to count that.
Okay.
Because my fear would be that if Snyder looked at that and said, well, we can't count it because it's not a school-supported sport. At the same time, it is Snyder hockey, but it's a club sport, and it's as rigorous as most of their extracurricular activities that are school-sponsored. So I would want us to put in the wordage so that they understand they're allowed to make that decision
Okay.
if they want to.
So the church choir would be okay.
It won't be the Snyder Church.
No, but it may not, Snyder may just be a name by an independent club or organization, community that's not tied to the school at all.
Great question.
Really, I mean, and it happens all the time. They'll use, go in the city program. I mean, actually, you look at almost many things below high school, there are community-based activities, Little League, so forth. You get into high school and you have similar type of things. So if we're looking at extracurricular activities, and it doesn't have to be school-based, it opens everything up to students' participation, a wide range of.
So in the guidance document, there are some activities that are not considered service-based learning. Anything that's paid now would fall under work-based learning, so a paid experience, something that is a mandated experience. The one thing about all three of these is that it has to be student-decided and led. So the school can't say everyone's running cross-country, that's not service-based learning. So it has to be student choice and student voice. And then the other piece was around a proselytizing experience. So if there's a student going out trying to convert people, it's typically not service-based learning as the nation would know.
Well, many of these extracurricular activities are not going to be student choice at all. They're going to be adult choices by what's offered and who gets to make the team. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities which students will be excluded from at the school level. Regardless of the size of school, Carmel High School has one varsity basketball team with 12 kids. That's it. So are there other activities that students can participate in to meet the same expectations? Is it a community intramural program? They don't make the basketball team, but they want to play basketball, so they go do it somewhere else. If they were at the school, it counts. If they're in a community activity, it doesn't. I mean, I think that's one of the questions I think we have to reconcile, because there are going to be a lot of places where students don't. We can look at an activities program, but it doesn't mean all students get to participate.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to be in the show choir just because you want to be.
Right.
And so it's that exclusion that concerns me, making sure that students still have activity. What we want to do is promote activity. We want students engaged in their community. We want them participating in things beyond school. And there's a lot of evidence to support that when students are engaged, that it has a lot of positive effects on students.
Yeah, so I should have clarified. The difference between student choice and adult choice is it cannot be school mandated. So the school can't say to fulfill service-based learning, everyone's doing cross-country this year, because that's not allowing the student choice. Versus the student tries out for the basketball team, they try out for the intramural basketball team, and they have that, they're choosing to pursue basketball versus the school mandating they pursue basketball.
Well, we're mandated they must do one of these things.
Yes.
Right? So then how do we create the greatest opportunity for students to actually fulfill these requirements and expectations? That's my point.
Okay.
Is that there's going to be some clear barriers that we can anticipate at the school level. What happens if a student gets to the last week of a season, removed from a team? They no longer meet the requirement. Student violates a athletic policy that bans them from season in their senior year in the spring. Do they not graduate from high school? Because they didn't successfully complete the season. We're going to have a lot of these scenarios that will have to be addressed at a local level. I think they're real. I mean, these aren't just hypothetical situations. These are real situations that occur. So,
Where did we end up with it? Is it IHSAA sponsored or school sponsored or school approved? Or leadership of the local district or school approved? I'm confused. This is a great discussion. These are questions, as Bertram said, these anymore are going to come up that we haven't even thought about or dreamed of. Come up. Question is, do we leave our students shortchanged at the end of their educational career in school? Be very cognizant of that. Holding a diploma from somebody because of a decision whether we're going to approve Snyder hockey or rugby could make it.
One of the issues that we agree to, I think, so far is that it'll happen at the local level. And that was a good clarification. The decision will be made at the local level. However, if I'm sitting at the local level, I don't think it's anything goes, right? And so there's got to be, we talk about guardrails, there's got to be some guardrails. I think it's incumbent upon us as a state policymaker to set those guardrails. And because I'm not comfortable with anything goes, because there's a lot of things out there that we could probably justify, but may not be important for that student. And so is there a set of criteria, Alicia, that you have put forward in the document, or is there some from a professional organization that sets criteria so that on the local level, if I have a student coming in and saying, I want to use my experience as whatever it is, I can compare that experience against a set of criteria.
Yes.
And where is that set of criteria so we can discuss it?
So that is little b2,
What page?
page 25. I'm sorry? So these are the design principles, again, set forth by the National Leadership Council around what quality service-based learning is. So each of the based learnings has these kinds of design principles to allow, again, that flexibility, but also provide those guardrails.
So at the local level, I can use this set of criteria on page 25 and 26 to determine whether those experiences would be acceptable at a state level, although we're not going to monitor that and so forth. But someone that's responsible at the local level would use these criteria and make a determination whether or not it would meet.
Yeah.
And so my question is to the board, are we comfortable with this set of criteria? Because what we're saying is this is our policy. These are the policy criteria that they're going to use at the local level. Are we comfortable with this?
Bertram?
another question along these lines, but I want to give a real scenario that I would anticipate. I know a lot of students I've seen over the years, they get to their senior year, they have to take a specific course to get the academic honors diploma. So they take their art class their senior year, and they're in the second semester, and they graduate, they meet the requirement. There are going to be students who put these type of things off until their senior year. Get to the last semester, and they participate in extracurricular activity. Now that extracurricular activity actually becomes part of their graduation requirement. Have we then crossed this line of extracurricular and co-curricular? And what are the legal implications of that? So I'll give you an example. Student decides to participate in extracurricular activity. They get toward the end of the year, and they violate the school's extracurricular policy, and they're removed from the activity. Now they don't graduate because they haven't met a graduation requirement. So those are real issues. And I'm also questioning schools who have drug testing policies that apply to extracurricular. And now how do those apply to co-curricular and academic programs for graduation requirements?
And I just have to remind the board that these concerns, I think, were brought up earlier as far as what if they move and IHSA denies participation. But there are other, I've been told, because there are other choices. There's access to other options. So if you don't play sports, then that kid gets kicked off the team. You're going to go and you're going to do a service-based learning project. You're going to go in your community and do whatever as long as it fits the guidelines. So we have those same concerns and a lot of people are calling, but I just want to remind the board, some of these were brought up during this earlier process as far as there's access here, but not access to everything because it's out of the kid's control. But there are other options that schools are just going to have to switch gears quickly, and schools will make it happen.
Yeah, but it does eliminate student choice.
100%, but I think there's a lot of choices that are eliminated before they get out of the gate.
Sure
Talk
there are.
about students who are not documented. They can't work. So there are already choices that are eliminated. Your school doesn't offer sports, period. I mean, there are already options that are eliminated, so that's why there's, I think, a menu of things, but these very issues were brought up way in December, I think.
I have nothing more to add. I think the superintendent has it exactly correct. I would draw the parallel to AP classes, for example. Not every student who wishes to take an AP class is allowed to take an AP class. In certain districts, it's predicated on PSAT scores based on resource allocation, how many seats are available in the AP classes. So I think exclusion is not necessarily an issue because of the option.
No, I was talking about a student who is participating. It's May, and the student takes a drug test and fails a drug test and is removed from extracurricular activity. Now they don't graduate. They don't meet a graduation requirement.
Yeah,
They're excluded based on a school policy, and it's permissible by law because it's part of an extracurricular activity. And that is, I just believe that those are going to be real issues that we have to confront.
Yeah, and
You know,
it
so
certainly raises-
do you just pivot and say, now, if the expectation is you have to have successful completion from beginning to end, and you're excluded at the end, you have no chance of graduating. Right?
So there certainly raises some due process issues, but let's not forget that there are waivers available. And so principals in the local districts still have the option.
So you failed a drug test, therefore you are eligible for a waiver of a graduation requirement.
Not for box 2 on all of those options. And so I guess the practical solution may be to encourage students and schools to hedge bets. Let's not wait till second semester senior year to check off a requirement. Let's start thinking about a meaningful engagement throughout the student's academic career.
A very different proposition than meeting a specific requirement of graduation. I understand. I mean, I think it would be logical to try to do some of these things early on, but that's not going to be practical.
Go ahead.
Alicia, I went through the criteria on page 25 and 26.
Yep.
They are embedded in the National Youth Leadership Council.
Yes.
And so it's not willy-nilly, we made these up.
No.
They are embedded, they've been used, they've been
Yeah.
proven to be effective. And so from my perspective, we answered the question at the local level, whether or not it's willy-nilly or not, or anything goes. It's not anything goes.
Mm-hmm.
It's very specific that the activity would need to meet, I assume, all of these criteria. These aren't ors, right?
Yeah.
These are ands and
Yeah.
ands and ands. And so that whole issue we spent a little time with, which was a great discussion. I feel confident that your document has answered that.
Okay, thank you.
So I think you just answered one of my questions. So an individual will have to meet all of those bullet points in all of those categories.
The experience will have to meet that. For each section, there are design principles that the experience must include.
Okay, I know you've answered this question before, Alicia, and I can't remember what the answer. So is this a service-based learning? Is this a 1-year process where a student meets it in their sophomore year, freshman year? And are they completed then?
Potentially.
So
that's
does
not-
that answer Dr. Bertram's question? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it's just from beginning of high school to end of high school, and in that time frame.
Okay, so if they're on a junior varsity basketball team and then are cut as a junior, one of the scenarios, Dr. Bertram, you may have been talking about, so that student has completed check that box saying I've completed that service-based learning based upon my 10th grade, and even though I couldn't make it, or in between my junior and senior year, I mess up and go to a party and get removed from that activity, whatever it happens to be. Correct with that?
Yeah, so again, this is that area where it's going to be uncomfortable. It's been uncomfortable for me, but I think it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people between that flexibility and prescription area.
Yeah.
Because the flexibility says the school is going to decide, they can work with the student, they will make that call. On the other hand, there are schools that want that prescription and want to know what to do in every situation. So that's why I'm hoping just giving those guardrails, giving those design principles, gives some kind of direction for the experience, but there's still enough wiggle room within that those kinds of situations can be addressed. Or if a student, I mean, some schools have like a freshman seminar, or those things are not going to be, those things aren't going to be eliminated, but they can be reworked to meet this.
So Alicia, I know you've explained this to me before. So one more time, explain to me if it's in, or an attorney, somebody, if it's in the situation like Dr. Bertram brought up and we've talked about up here, how are those extracurricular anymore? Because if they are required for graduation, those are curricular or co-curricular. How is that extracurricular if I need it to get a diploma? That's where I'm like just struggling. And I know people in the field are going to struggle to say, how is that extracurricular? So then those discipline changes, access changes, all that changes. So help us through that. So when we get the calls, we have a good answer that's sensible.
Let me try. Aren't there multiple ways to meet this particular box?
All the boxes, yes.
Right, so it isn't extracurricular must be done.
No.
There's many different things.
Right.
So if you don't like extracurricular, you think there's some moral
work
or
instead.
some issue about that, then you don't have to do extracurricular. Maybe at the local level you say, we're not going to use extracurricular. We're only going to use service-based experiences such as, and then you list those out. So none of this is prescriptive and mandatory. At the local level, if you can't do it for some reason, you just don't do it. Every school is different. Every school
Yeah,
doesn't
so
provide
help-
extracurricular.
I 100% understand what you're saying, but for the child who that's their pathway, it no longer is extracurricular. It's part of their curricular or co-curricular. It's not for them because they've chosen a pathway that they do have access to it. So at that point, they're on the volleyball team. It's part of their diploma track. They're successful on the volleyball team. They pass their drug screens and all that, but is it considered extracurricular for disciplinary purposes, for access, for participation, for drug screening, for you name it? The differences between extracurricular and co-curricular and curricular are vastly different. So if I'm a principal and I know Susie's on this track and volleyball is part of it because she chose it, she had access, even though she had lots of choices, that's her track. That's what this is about, right? So for her at that point, it's no longer extra. That's where, and I just need guidance on how do you answer that. And I'm still, even though they have choices, I'm still not sure how those individual students who select that path, that's still extracurricular. And we may not have the answer today. Maybe we need to get the answer formulated for another day.
So I don't think this, I agree with Dr. Freitas. I don't think this changes the landscape at all. I mean, we can take it out. I think the goal was to add as many things in there as possible to demonstrate those skills.
And I'm certainly not advocating taking it out.
And I think to Chad's point, probably good to not hedge your bet, right? To do multiple things. Put in there is just another option to have a menu of as many possible ways to demonstrate and satisfy box 2 as possible. I don't think it changes the landscape.
Really? I mean, and I'm certainly not advocating to take it out because I think there are a lot of students who are going to choose that because we have tons of kids who are already participating in extracurricular. So I'm not trying to advocate for that. I'm just trying to look for an answer. So when they call, I mean, I can hand them over, but we're already getting the questions in the field. I don't have a good answer. And so that's all I'm looking for.
Is the concern that for example, basketball teams will not be able to cut students.
Well, your discipline's different, your drug screening's different, because how you treat an extracurricular student, how you treat someone who that's their curricular, co-curricular, it's not, some of it's parallel, you're running two systems parallel, some overlap, but some's vastly different. So that's where the question becomes, how are we treating them?
So, but why would that change though?
you're
Because now it's
permitted-
required. I mean, help me out here. I mean, am I the
You're-
only one
It's
thinking
not
this?
required.
You're permitted to do things in extracurricular that you cannot do in co-curricular. For instance, you cannot drug test all your students, right, because they go to school. But the courts have allowed you to drug test students who participate in extracurricular activities.
Your
Same
GPA.
thing with students driving to school. You can drug test students based on driving to school, but you can't because they're in Algebra 1 and they're enrolled in your school. So as soon as you include extracurricular activity as part of a graduation requirement, and the students pursuing that pathway, I think the concern then is, have we intermingled these in a way that will create issues for us? And it may be, like I said, if a student has met the requirement earlier on, I just know what happens at the end of a school year where you have students in jeopardy of graduating, whether it's academic, and now here you have a graduation requirement, something happens in an extracurricular activity, and it happens all the time. I mean, this is a common occurrence. This isn't just going to be this random, occasional occurrence. We're going to see this type of thing happen, and the challenge will be, I mean, we get challenged now with students who are excluded based on drug testing and other things from extracurricular. And now that's part of their graduation requirement. That's my concern.
And you have kids that are under an athletic code of conduct, and a lot of times there's a minimum GPA to participate. And so sometimes that's the IHSAs, or sometimes schools beef that up. So if you're automatically, which I know they have other choices, but that's the piece of, can they follow that anymore? Because it's supposed to have access to that, and that's my path I'm choosing, but yet I might be right under that GPA, but I still have all passing grades. I'm still going to graduate. I'm doing fine in my box 1. I'm good. That's where that's where I think it gets a little bit like muddy.
And we can look into this further. We did seek an attorney general on around, does every district have to offer every locally developed pathway? The answer was no, just the minimum one. I mean, that's not the idea. Add the flexibility, and there's options there that those concerns are. We can certainly continue to look at that.
Thank you.
If students get credit for service-based summer between.
Yeah. It would have to be the beginning of high school, according to the guidance document.
According to what?
The guidance document, but again,
If
we can change that.
But they
What
get
about
high school
students
credit in 8th grade
Yeah.
and 7th grade.
I mean,
I would like.
okay. So what would you like the parameter to be?
What page are you on, Alicia?
See something.
I figured this is memorized for you.
I do know it very
That could be an
well.
assumption, I'm just saying.
It would be,
Line 4.
I would see, probably C5 under time commitment. That would probably be the best place to further clarify that. I don't know if, at this point, I think it just specifies it has to be done during high school, during a high school career. But I can specify that to include the summer before 9th grade through summer after senior year, if those are the parameters we're comfortable with.
Is there anything statutorily that would restrict that from happening? Or anything in ESSA or state law that says it must be a high school experience in order to count for high school graduation?
Definitely not in ESSA. I can't think of anything in state statute. As to Dr. Perkins' point, students can earn high school credit in their 8th grade year.
7th grade year.
And 7th grade year as well.
Could they do it at 3rd grade?
Yes.
Yeah, we have some kids that dump down to
Yes.
take that.
Could they do it at kindergarten? Could they do it as a student not part of a public school in homeschooling?
I don't have those answers.
I'm not asking for answers from you. I'm just raising those questions for discussion. I'm not sure how I feel about it. But at what point do you draw the line? For me, when you said high school, it's a pretty definite spot that it starts. But when we start going before high school, I think it opens up all kinds of other opportunities that we need to at least discuss. As I look at the criteria, I'm not sure a third grader who's doing a service learning experience would meet all of these criteria. So that's a second part of this discussion if we decide to open it up completely.
But I would argue if you're taking, there are students who take summer classes, 8th grade year of their summer going into high school for freshman classes. There are students who you're expected to go to summer practices as an 8th grader going into high school for basketball and cross country. And so you spend that summer, if you're an active student, after you leave 8th grade, you spend that summer at the high school transitioning. And so I think that many students spend that time getting a lot of this credit in.
So the discussion's much different for me. If we're saying the summer prior to high school is okay, I'm okay with that. But if we say no, it's open up to 3rd grade, kindergarten, all those kinds of things, and I'm uncomfortable with that because I don't think it can meet the criteria that we said that would be applied at the local level. So are we saying that it's the 8th grade prior to high school? And are all schools in Indiana configured the same way, that it's a 9 through 12?
Tony just
say
said.
that again.
Hey, what I was saying was number between.
So Marcia just pointed out, 8th grader becomes a 9th grader according to the statute, July 1st. So specifically July 1st. So we can, I can include summer prior to 9th grade year. I can say July 1st.
July 1st? Statutorily, right?
And then would it be through graduation date or summer after senior? Am I just making this more complicated?
But Marcia, I'm going to go back to you. When we have need an extra credit or two, don't they have until the end of October to finish up their graduation requirements? Am I right with that or wrong?
It's what the department allows to finish graduation, but by statute, a school year starts July 1. So the 18-19 school year starts July 1. But kids are given till October
To complete their requirements.
it's a separate consideration than the
Okay,
school
but
year.
So that would be a graduate of 18,
Right.
correct? So what does that do to you, Alicia, when we say, do we say after graduation ceremonies or July 1st? Because students still have the right to earn that diploma through the end of October.
So I can specify up till October.
I think October 1 closes.
Yeah.
Can we get some clarity? Maggie, what is the close date for seniors? September 30. So I think October 1 was always on everybody's.
Okay, so
Yeah.
through September, they're able to do it.
Okay. Sounds good.
I don't know, that's a question. I'm not.
Oh, okay. I have July 1st as the start, and then September 30th as the end? Okay. That's no problem. So those were the issues I've heard a lot about. I want to give you all an opportunity to ask additional clarifying questions. If there are additional issues that you saw within the document, or if you've been hearing things that require additional answers, I can make it longer. So just whatever, anything else that's regarding this document that you would like to discuss prior to a vote coming up in July. I would like to be able to address that and give you an opportunity to review. Mm-hmm.
This is really complex, a lot of information, and the communication of this is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the notion that we need one authoritative source at all time, I think is really important because we have multiple documents floating out there. And so my question is really a next kind of question, what next? Personally, I would like to see one source that is the source for all information pertaining to pathways. And one way to do it is to have someone, I don't care who it is, but someone take responsibility for having one authoritative source, probably on a website
Okay,
that everyone has access to, so that as of this date, this is the latest and greatest information we have about pathways. And so as things come up, you can go to one source rather than looking back on this document or other documents from the past. I think that will help with the confusion in the future. And I understand if we pass this, this will become the document. And so this would probably be the first document that we would put up there. But there's going to be all kinds of other questions that come up related to this document. And if those questions have a definitive answer, I think those should go onto the website too.
okay,
So that if I have a question or someone in the public has a question or staff has a question, we can go to one source and have that at the same place. And everyone sees the same thing. Is that your intent, to have one authoritative source?
that's a loaded question.
Well, is it a good idea? Or were you planning on having multiple documents floating out there and everyone sort of doing what they want to do?
I think your idea is a good one. The department and I are working on finding some time to conceptualize what that will look like in terms of clearinghouse for documents, to see what implementation will look like and various roles.
Okay, that'd be great. And during the process stage, obviously, we've had multiple documents. And I sat through a superintendent's meeting on Tuesday, and there was some misinformation that was there, and people just asking for what is the definitive document. And so in response to that question, I think it's important that all the agencies question. I think it's that all the agencies work together and we have one document that is the authoritative source.
Okay. I can ensure that this document works to achieve that aim. I've been vetting it with colleagues at DWD, DOE, and CHE. I don't know if other agencies beyond that would need to vet it, but I can continue to send it around and make sure we're all speaking the same language.
What did you just say?
I've so far, so I've vetted all of the versions, but this one as well with DWD, CHE, and DOE to ensure that the information is consistent across us four.
There aren't multiple documents floating around. I mean, this is it. Like, we didn't create our own.
You know, I think we agreed on two. I would hate for, I would be concerned if the state board staff had control of that, or if the DOE had control of that. I would ask, and I asked this Tuesday, can we identify a person from each of those entities to work together to create that one single document, so that it's not just, the finger pointing doesn't just go to state board in a negative way, state board staff, or in a negative way to DOE, so that those two entities are working together to post whatever we're talking about, and however that works, so that there's input from all sides of this.
The other part of the discussion on Tuesday is there's going to be a lot of questions that come up about the document in implementation, right? So we have a policy book, and then questions are going to come forward. And I think we need to get all the agencies together and have one person in one agency, because we're dealing with 4 or 5 state agencies here. Someone needs to be responsible for getting these questions in and going through a process for answering them, and then posting it onto the website, which is the authoritative source. We're not going to settle that today, I know, but I think that's the aim, so that if a superintendent calls, a teacher calls, a guidance counselor calls, there's one place to call, one number to call, and an individual that's responsible for coordinating among the 3 or 4 or 5 agencies. And right now, it's happening, different agencies want to be involved, and that's terrific. But we're getting to the point where we need one authoritative document, one authoritative person who will take the information in, make a decision after consulting with these agencies, and then posting it. So we don't have that confusion any longer.
Isn't that why we have a Department of Education? That their primary responsibility to be that source?
Well, you know,
For schools or on graduation requirements?
through the statutes, it is a complex issue. We have 4 or 5 agencies involved. And I'm not sure all of it's DOE. I'm not sure if all of it is workforce development. It's spread out among multiple agencies. And so it might be DOE. I'm not saying it isn't. All I'm saying is that right now it is confusing. And people out there are confused. And so all I'm advocating for is there's one place to get the information.
Okay, we'll work across as staff. We'll work together and see how we can figure that out.
So the involvement of the other agencies, DWD, State Board of Ed, CHE, and Board of Ed then included DOE.
Yep.
That was for the purpose of the review of the application procedure for CTE, local CTE and local creative pathway. Is that correct?
Not alone. So there is an interagency, it's called Pathways to Prosperity. It's an interagency group that was meeting prior to the grad pathways that involved specifically DWD, CHE, and DOE. And then we were invited to join for this document. So those agencies have been involved from the creation of this up until today. I mean, I'm still sending them questions and having them vet things. So I rely on the other agencies for multiple purposes.
But they're legislatively, was the purpose of that group to review applications? Does it go beyond that legislatively?
Legislatively, it was to look at the concentrators for CTE. If we're talking 1426.
That's interesting.
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't sure where you were referring to. Yes.
Included then locally created pathways. That legislation. We have, apparently.
I understand your question, Dr. Yeager. Your question is specifically about the locally created pathways and the legislation that essentially created the group that looks at the applications that are received. Is that correct?
Correct, I think.
So that team of reviewers are CHE, DWD, DOE, and Sboe. I think what Alicia was referring to was this broader group being involved in helping vet the guidance document. So 2 different things. The larger group is used to help vet the guidance document, while the locally created pathways and those applications are limited to the groups within the legislation plus DOE. So 2 different reviews for 2 different purposes.
There's one representative. When you review these applications, there's one representative from each of those 4 groups.
So from State Board, it was myself, and I brought Chad in as well to help for legal counsel. One person from DWD, one person from CHE, and then Amanda McCammon and Dr. Ken Folks from DOE.
There be just one? I get concerned when there's 2 from DOE or 2 from DWD and 1 from the others.
We've already cleaned that up internally. There will be 1 from the department.
So should there be just 1?
So then it would just be.
I see bringing legal counsel in.
Yeah, so it would just be one. If
I get
DOE
that.
would like to reduce their number to just 1 person, then it would just be Chad and I from the same agency.
Thank you. So where are we?
So,
Done.
next step, thank you. So, so I'm going to take all the comments and feedback you had on the document today. I'll make those edits. Coming up on June 5th, I believe Brian sent out an email to everyone notifying you of this. So we've had, across all the focus groups, is about 120 people meeting individually per their request. So they've asked to meet in a focus group of counselors, a focus group of principals, and so on. But early in this process, there was a recommendation to have kind of a final summit of everyone, to have everyone in the same room. So that will happen on June 5th. I'll be honest, they're probably going to be sick of me talking about the guidance document at that point. So I'm having breakout sessions. One of them, I'll be doing that. I don't think will be well attended. But so the June 5th summit in the afternoon in Wayne Township will be a summit of everyone to talk through some policy issues, but then also start to look more towards the future and what happens after July 11th when this is voted on. So the final vote on this particular document will be July 11th at that board meeting. That way I can make the changes and vet them with the field and ensure everyone sees what happened at this meeting in this document. And then following that is going to be rolling this out to the field. As you know, it's not the shortest read, but because it is comprehensive, we have to determine the best way to get this into the hands of practitioners, either through PAMS and SAMs, through other associations, some of the statewide conferences that are happening in the fall that myself and some other staff and board members will be a part of, then also working in tandem with the department as they roll it out and implement and serving as additional policy support and technical assistance. And the last piece are just some additional documents that I'm working on. So one, as you probably noticed, there was a reference to an appendix throughout the document, and there was no appendix with this document. I realized including the appendix made it over 75 pages, so I decided to separate that out and have a separate document with the appendices and some resources, some examples that people can refer to. So I'm working on that to get finalized by the 11th. And then there's been requests from the focus groups to have a simple, streamlined, boiled down version of information for parents and for businesses. As you can see, simple and streamlined is maybe not my strongest suit, so I'm working on that with some others to ensure that those documents are created with the goal of July 11th.
We've had some really good discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what ifs that are going to be difficult to answer and will have to be answered on the fly as this gets implemented. What if we're not ready by July 11th? What's the impact? What if the board's not ready by July 11th? What's the impact?
So this immediate impact would be to 2018 graduates that have opted in to using grad pathways. So from session, grad pathways was applied retroactively. So this year's students could use grad pathways in lieu of their GQE. The department and I have been communicating that the grad report for those students opens in July with anticipation that this passes. So the farther we push that the grad report just won't open until this is approved, and that closes in October. So if we push it past then, I don't know how students this year will be able to be reported as graduates.
Thank you. I'm not saying that's going to happen or that I'm interested in that, but what happens?
Worst case scenario, yeah.
Thanks.
I will say that in my conversations with people, they are ready. They're ready for this to be. I mean, people have seen it. Over 250 people have seen this and all the other versions, if not more. That's just the people I've sent it to. So in my conversations, I feel like I feel like they're ready. They've seen it. They've read it. They know it's expected. They're ready to go.
So for those graduates who are under it now, how did schools do it without guardrails?
That's a great question. I don't have an easy answer for that. I've tried my best to work with schools to help them to assimilate what's in the document, to apply, to be compatible with the legislation. So I've just advised for them to use this as a template for now with the hopes that it passes in July.
So some people have seen this and are using it
Oh, yeah.
without it being board approved.
Yes. They've definitely seen it. I don't know to what extent they're using it, though, but they've definitely seen it.
But in all my communications, I always emphasize that it's draft, it's not final, things will change.
When's the next meeting of the group of four?
The four agencies?
I'm sorry?
The four agencies?
Yes.
I don't know.
And to meet and to review applications.
So we met 2 weeks ago for in advance of the June 13th meeting. We'll probably meet mid-June in advance of the July meeting.
To review more
Yeah, as they
of
come
the
in.
input? Okay.
But I don't have an exact date scheduled yet.
I'm wondering how or why we do that if it hasn't officially been adopted by, I know the rubric has, adopted by the board, correct? How do we do that if the whole document hasn't been?
So,
And how do
so
we
for the
look at
locally
that and
created,
say, okay, we're going to recommend you to the board to be passed and you not to be passed?
because the locally created pathway framework and local CTE framework has already been passed by the board. And that's what's been utilized to create the application in the rubric. So the board passed the locally created pathway framework in April and the CTE one in May.
Yes.
So those have already passed, those are already established, and that's what allows us to move forward with those two pieces. But to Dr. McCormick's point of schools using this without it being finalized, that's a sticky situation.
So really, they could have created their own guardrails this year.
Potentially.
Yeah, they just did their thing for the school year.
Potentially, but as soon as this passes, similar to the policy, this will become similar policy moving forward.
Okay, any other comments for next, or were you?
Oh, I'm good.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Alicia and any, Dr. Yeager?
Are you getting ready to close the meeting?
I am.
Okay. Leanne's sitting back there.
Oh.
And I just want to say thank you to Leanne. I know she's moved on to a different assignment, and I got to know her as a board member, co-board member. She was terrific. Worked for the department, was terrific, and we wish her the best, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to work with her in a new venue. But I just want to recognize Leanne and all she's done for girls and boys across the state of Indiana. Thank you, Leanne.
Any other comments?
Yeah, once again, Alicia, great job with all this. Thank you for your work. Well done. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.